So, hello everyone. I am Vikrant Gaikwad, currently a second year MBBS student at Dr. Ullas Patil Medical College, Jalgaon, India, and also the Executive Assistant Chief Information Officer at YCA. In this very series, we bring out to you another journey, another episode, another story. This is going to enthrall and inspire us to horizons. I have the absolute pleasure of having with us Mrs. Laurie Adami directly connecting with us from LA, from US. Uh, I cannot tell you, ma'am, how happy I am after having learned about your story. I would definitely like to know more about it. But before that, I would like to introduce my organization formally to you. So, YCA, the Youth Cancer Action Project, by this startup, we aim to create more and more awareness among public, especially the youth, related to the dreaded evil in our society, in the world, the biggest disease of all times, that's cancer. And also by this, we would like to encourage more and more research options, research opportunities for the interested fellas so that they can do something of cancer, do something more with cancer. And someday in the world, we can have a palliative cure overall for cancer. So these are our motives, our objectives, and these interviews are definitely going to help us, especially our viewers, to in order to gain strength, in order to get inspired and live a journey there and fight their battle with cancer with ease. So
Well, it's my pleasure to be here with you today, Vikrant.
yeah, the pleasure is entirely ours, ma'am. So, ma'am, before we actually begin with what about our topic, I would just like you to tell us a little bit about your backstory, about your background, about where do you come from, what your childhood was like, early life.
Sure. So I was actually born in the East Coast of the United States in a city called Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania and grew up in the Northeast. Went to college in upstate New York. Was actually a Russian major, Russian language major, and spent a semester in the Soviet Union in my sophomore year of college in 1979. So I've just aged myself. Um, so I, after college, thought about working for the government and was recruited by the CIA and the NSA because of my language, my Russian language skills, but elected to go into financial services instead, and was working in Boston for a large bank starting in the early 80s, and ended up using a software program at this large bank of a company that was based in Los Angeles. And I came out to Los Angeles on business to get more up to speed on the software, and I was offered a position. So in 1984, I made the cross-country drive from Boston to Los Angeles, California, and began working for this small software company that was developing risk management software for fixed income investors. So very quantitative software. And I was with that firm for almost 25 years and ended up taking over as president in the late 90s when the founder stepped down. And so I had this really amazing career. I'd amassed 3 million miles on American Airlines with all my airplane travel. I was bi-coastal for a number of years, working out of Manhattan and also then being in LA. So going back and forth every 2 weeks. And got married in 1998 when I was 38 years old. And in 2000, I had my son, was born, and life was great. You know, I was carrying on and running a company, going to London. We got bought by a business that was based in London. So I was doing a lot of travel to London, New York, Boston from LA, had a young child, and started to feel unwell in 2004, 2005. And that was when my story took a bit of a turn.
Okay, ma'am, that was really good to know on my part about your early life, and because when I have read about you, when I knew that I was going to interview you, I definitely had to read about you. And what I read, that story just exuded one thing, and that single thing was life and a desire to live life. Let me tell everybody that ma'am is a six-time relapse non-Hodgkin's lymphoma stage 4 cancer survivor. It is a I am a medical student. I know how worse the prognosis of the grade 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is, and it takes a strong desire to live in order to fight back. So coming to the diagnosis, ma'am. So how did it go on with the diagnosis? Like when was it? Like I think in 2006 it was diagnosed. So how was it
Correct.
made and what exactly happened? I would just like to know a little bit about that.
Sure, sure. So as I mentioned, in about 2004, I began to feel unwell. I started to get sinus infections, bronchial infections. I had found I had a node in my neck that was swollen, and I felt something funny in my abdomen, and I was just getting very, very tired. And I saw these doctors who, were supposedly the best ear, nose, and throat specialists and, internists, et cetera. And, they all just dismissed my concerns. They said, well, you probably have allergies, and that's why you're getting sinus infections, and that's why you have a swollen node in your neck. And they thought I had a hernia in my abdomen. And, they would just say, well, look, your blood work is all normal. So don't worry, let us treat you for your allergies. They just kind of minimized my concerns. And I'm blonde, I'm a woman. People tend to not take me seriously. As hard as it is to believe in this day and age, you still get sort of, your concerns can be dismissed. And I had a doctor say to me, oh, and I was worried about lymphoma actually, because I knew about swollen lymph nodes, right? And I had this doctor say to me, oh, well, why would you think you had lymphoma? And I said, well, I was looking on Google. Oh, so Dr. Google can diagnose you. He said, you just have allergies. If you let me treat your allergies, your lymph node will, recede. And look, your blood work is all normal. You don't have cancer if your blood work is normal. And my blood work was normal. So, I ended up taking my husband with me on one of these visits with one of these expert ear, nose, and throat guys. And when I asked him if I could possibly have lymphoma, he actually rolled his eyes at my husband and was so dismissive. My husband was horrified. He said after, I can't believe any doctor would treat you like that. And that's what I was putting up with. So I was going around, and finally I thought, I've got to get to a good diagnostician. So I got rid of all my doctors. I got a referral to a leading diagnostician in Los Angeles who looked at me and he said, yeah, this could be a hernia and it could be allergies, but you know what? We don't guess about this stuff. That's why we have a machine called a CT machine. And he sent me that week in 2006. And on Good Friday, which was April 14th, 2006, I found out I had a mass the size of a grapefruit in my abdomen that was not a hernia. And I had a node, the node in my neck was also lymphoma. I was told I had spots on my lungs. So they thought initially that I might have lung cancer as well, which came as quite as a surprise to me because I was never a smoker, although I know a lot of people get lung cancer that have never smoked. But so you go from being this totally healthy person whose concerns have been dismissed, to finding out I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin lymphoma, even in my bone marrow, is everywhere. The PET scan lit up like a Christmas tree, as they said. So that was a story. And, when I had expressed these concerns to doctors about my fatigue and all these things, they said, look, You're 46 years old, you're running a software company, you have a young kid at home, you're traveling a lot. I'd be exhausted too. But in my heart, I knew something was really wrong. And it just took finding the right doctor to finally listen to me and order the right kinds of tests so they could figure out what was going on.
Well, sometimes it's the intuition also which follows, and I am glad that you didn't keep up to those diagnosticians' words and you followed your heart and you went to a proper diagnostician, because
Right.
any kind of delay would have been detrimental. So at the age of 46, you were still aware about it, and despite being in a field totally disparate from the medical field, you had a proper intuition, a proper instinct, and I think that makes a hell lot of difference when survival comes into play. Also, one thing
Right.
that you've highlighted about having lung cancer and smoking, of course, there's a very strong association. So nobody should be doing that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I unfortunately know several people that are quite young that now have lung cancer, and they never were smokers. So, and I just cringe to think how many times they get asked, "Oh, did you smoke cigarettes?" Because it's like, no. And it turns out I didn't have lung cancer. It was all just the lymphoma. So, at that point, I had to go through biopsies. And because there's dozens of types of lymphoma, there's Hodgkin, there's non-Hodgkin, there's T cell, there's B cell, there's diffuse large B cell, follicular, mantle cell. I mean, there are so many types of lymphoma that they have to be very careful with the diagnosis because, of course, you want to make sure you've got the diagnosis correct before you commence the treatment. So at the time when I was diagnosed with a subtype of non-Hodgkin's that was B cell, and it's follicular non-Hodgkin. So it's considered an indolent form of the disease. So indolent being more slow growing than a diffuse large B cell, which is very, very aggressive. That said, my cancer at times acted very aggressively. And by the time I was diagnosed, I had such extensive disease burden that the doctors actually speculated that I may have had cancer for over 5 years by that point. And it only got to the point where it was getting so large that it began to impact my quality of life. I had a tumor in my lacrimal gland, which is your tear duct, and it had blocked my tear duct. And so I developed extremely dry eye, very, very painful eye. And, I was a long time contact lens wearer, and suddenly I couldn't wear my contacts anymore. So that was also a symptom that I was experiencing that led some doctors to wonder if maybe I had Sjogren's, which is an autoimmune disorder, Sjogren's syndrome, which in fact I didn't. And I was tested for that and it was negative. So it was the, the non-Hodgkin. And, when I was diagnosed in 2006, I mean, that's 15 years ago, and a lot has happened in 15 years. And when I was diagnosed in 2006, there was one approved therapy for someone like me who had extensive disease burden. I was very symptomatic of the disease, and that treatment was R-CHOP. And it was a kind of a brute force chemotherapy that had been used, a combination of, chemotherapy agents, prednisone, and a monoclonal antibody called Rituxan. And so the standard for someone like me was 6 treatments of that therapy. And then the expectation was that, okay, you'll get a good long remission. But I also learned that follicular non-Hodgkin is considered an incurable type of cancer, unlike some of the more aggressive lymphomas that have very high cure rates. Even Hodgkin disease is now very curable. Diffuse large B cells very curable. Follicular was considered an incurable malignancy. So, I got 4 opinions when I was diagnosed, I went to see 4 specialists. And living in Los Angeles, I have great access to very large cancer research facilities, leading one being UCLA, but there's a number of other facilities in Los Angeles. So I was able to get a lot of opinions about treatment. And I actually had one oncologist at a large institution whose name I won't say, who told me, oh, well, you have a 50% chance that you'll be alive in 2 years. And when I got very upset, he couldn't figure out why. He said, well, 2 years is a really long time. I said, not when you're 46 years old and you have a little boy who's just in kindergarten. To think that I might leave my son I might die when he's only in 2nd grade, that's not okay. And I never went back to him because I felt like I didn't want his prediction for me to impact my color of how I was going to do. And I realized early on, I didn't have a 50% chance of being alive. I was either 100%, I was here, or I was 0 and I was dead. There was to me, the statistics made no sense. The other thing I learned early on is that these statistics are very, very outdated. So they don't take into account all of the new therapies that are coming out. Every month there's new things being approved. They also don't take into account the fact that I was 46. A lot of people are diagnosed with blood cancer in their 80s, and they have other, pre-existing conditions. And so, somebody in their 80s may not be able to tolerate a treatment as well as somebody in their 40s. And it also, statistics don't take into account the fact I live in Los Angeles, where we have so many lymphoma experts. So I have a lot of access to great treatments and great medical care. So I quickly learned to just ignore those statistics, but I also quickly learned to ignore that doctor who told me I had a 50% chance of living for 2 years, and I never went back to him.
Well, that's very true. When you cannot confide into a physician, then his therapy would definitely act as a nocebo. And it's really not cool to say that to a patient, that you might not live more than 2 years.
Right.
It's
And you'd be surprised how often doctors will say that. And, one of the things I've learned over the years, I'm no doctor, but I know doctors are very, very smart academically. And in order to get into medical school, in order to do all of that, requires a rigor academically. But I think there's been a bit of a disconnect in our medical schools to train doctors on the emotional side of things and the patient, side of things. And, I think sometimes doctors make statements that, I don't think they really think before they make those statements. So, and I've talked to numerous patients now because I spend a lot of time helping other patients. And their doctors are telling them, get your paperwork in order. This is a terrible diagnosis. And I'm like, wait a second, So, I think there's this sort of disconnect between the science and, really cancer treatment is much of an art as it is a science. And, especially now, there are so many different treatment options. And the medical doctors really need to understand sort of the big picture and how all these new therapies can be utilized so as not to burn bridges for patients moving forward, and to really do the least harm possible to the patient, to allow that patient to have a good quality of life. So, I think it's changing slowly, but, out of the box. So I had this, 6 treatment R-CHOP regimen from June till September of 2006. I was scanned halfway through the treatments, and believe it or not, my cancer was gone after just 3 treatments. And given how extensive my disease burden was, we were all very encouraged and thinking, okay, I'm going to get a great response. Maybe I'll be in remission for 5 or 10 years. And then, if it comes back, hopefully there'll be something newer I can try. So I continued with the 6 cycles. I finished the 6 cycles. I was scanned after my 6th cycle in September and learned that I was in a complete remission. And I was then moved over to a maintenance therapy of Rituxan I think it was supposed to be every 90 days. I got an infusion of this monoclonal antibody called Rituxan, and the expectation was that it would keep me in remission. So of course, Thanksgiving, I merrily went back to work, resumed my work schedule, my travel. Okay, this is in my sort of hopefully in the rear view mirror, and I will move on. They were continuing to do quarterly scans on me, and unfortunately, in January, I went in for a scan and I had uptake on the PET scan already in my lung again. And the doctor thought, well, maybe it's scar tissue. Of course, we hadn't seen it before. So at that point, I kind of was on notice that I may be already relapsing. And in fact, that's what happened. And so even though I had such a good response, and so early on, which had led everybody to think, oh, you're going to get a long remission, my cancer was back, in like less than 4 months. My cancer was coming back.
So with all these things happening, with a rampant diagnosis coming in, with undergoing those chemotherapy is a very, very difficult procedure for the one who undergoes. As a med school student, as a would-be doctor, I do see that. I have seen several patients in my home. I have seen patients undergoing that, and it is really disastrous. And thereafter,
It
a relapse. So was it like hell broke, or
was,
how did you take it, or how was it?
right. It's crushing. And, when I went through the chemo, of course, I lost my hair. I lost my hair 3 times during my journey. That's why I now just keep it short. It's just easier not to think about it. But, that hair loss to me, was a very minor issue. Like men who have no hair permanently tell me, Laurie, don't worry, it's going to grow back. But I also had a lot of side effects from the treatment. Of course, mouth sores, my counts dropped pretty precipitously. So I had to get, Neulasta, Neupogen shots to boost counts. I burned through on my first R-CHOP chemo. I was just doing it right into my veins, and it burned through my vein. So I got an infection and I had to get a PICC line put in. And the day after I had the PICC line put in, I was leaning over to pick something up and I felt a pain in my chest, and I was immediately concerned, called my oncologist, went in, and I had a blood clot in my lung that had broken off from the PICC line. So I developed a pulmonary embolism. I also developed a urinary blockage. So they had to catheterize me, and I had to carry a bag around with me for a while till I got through that. So, there were like things side effects that would come up from all this chemo. And, they were great at managing it. And now, like, I didn't have nausea. They gave me anti-nausea meds. I was worried I was going to have to smoke pot because I never liked smoking pot. And they said, no, we have anti-nausea meds. So they did that. Anyway, so you get through it. You think, oh, great, I'm done. You celebrate, it's gone. And then it comes back, and it's so demoralizing, and just so, like, you just feel like your body so let you down. And, all this treatment and this response, and then to have to deal with it again, and the knowledge that really I'd had the biggest guns, as they call it, for the therapy, and the fact that it came back so quick, and I was looking at not a lot of options. And so it was just very, very mentally challenging, and so I just was in a position where I could just watch the disease for a while. So I was going in for scans, and we knew ultimately I was going to have to get treated. But I was able to watch it for over a year, and I was continuing to work. Really, the only thing left for me at that point was a stem cell transplant, an autologous stem cell transplant, where they remove your stem cells. And we had actually harvested my stem cells after I was declared in a complete remission. And so my stem cells were harvested at a facility in Southern California that does a lot of stem cell transplants. And So the expectation had been when I harvested was that, well, if it comes back, we'll give you an autologous stem cell transplant. But I began to research autologous stem cell transplants, and I discovered for a follicular non-Hodgkin patient, the likelihood of relapse after stem cell transplant was 50% within the first year. And especially for someone like me who never really had a durable remission after R-CHOP, my odds of having a successful stem cell transplant declined. And I would have to go in the hospital. I would have to get an even more difficult chemotherapy regimen than R-CHOP, because they would add other agents to it. So, okay, so I had just gone through this chemo, and I was going to have another brute force chemo, which obviously could result in potentially more side effects. And then I would get my stem cells back, and I would have to wait until my immune system recovered. So I would be in the hospital for 3 to 4 weeks. Well, I had a young boy, who just turned 6, and to go into the hospital for a month, it wasn't going to be possible for me, given my husband and my lifestyle. He has his own business. So the fact that if I thought I could go in the hospital for 3 or 4 weeks and get a sustained durable remission, I may have done it, but I didn't like the odds. So at that point, I started searching for a clinical trial.
Okay, so that's how the journey of chemos and relapses continued. Well, coming to your little boy, so I would like to ask you that while going in through these spirals of relapsing, of chemos, of cancer, of NHL, of hospital, life somehow turns a little upside down. So how did this affect your family life? How did this affect your little boy who was just 6 back then?
Right. Yeah, so he was in kindergarten when I was diagnosed, and he wasn't old enough really to understand. He knew I hadn't been feeling well, of course. And then my husband and I, because I was going to be losing my hair, we needed to share with him what was going on, because of course, if his mom shows up at school with a scarf on, his classmates likely had lost grandparents to cancer, and they knew, okay, your mom must have cancer. So we decided to be proactive and inform him, but we wanted to do it in a way that was not scary. So, my husband actually said to him, we sat down, we had a little family meeting. My husband said, mommy hasn't been feeling well, and the doctors found out what's wrong, and she's going to get a treatment that's going to make the disease go away, but she's probably not going to feel really well during her treatments, and she's going to be tired. And so, you might have to take care of mom a little bit, and she might want to sleep more and just rest more. And she's also going to lose her hair. And my son was just, wait, but ladies don't go bald. She's going to lose her hair. She's going to be bald. Wow, cool. He thought it was the coolest thing ever. And then that night he was in bed. I just read him his bedside stories, and he was in bed and I was in my bed, and he yelled out, Mom, can you come in? And Mommy, can you come talk to me? And I went in, and he was really upset. And he said, Mommy, I'm really worried because you're going to get bald. You're going to lose your hair, and everybody's going to make fun of you. And I don't want people to make fun of you. And so he was very upset. And I said, well, I'm going to be wearing a wig, and I'm going to be wearing a scarf, so people won't necessarily know I'm bald. And, you'll just tell them I'm getting treatment, I'm getting medicine to make me well. But he was very upset about that. And it was just really sweet, because initially he just thought it was the coolest thing ever. So, it was a challenge. And although I must say that when I was diagnosed and I started treatment, I stopped working. I went on medical leave. And, suddenly I was there to pick him up from school every day. And, I had to be careful, obviously, because my immune system was weakened. But suddenly I was around more, which, I think for him was kind of a nice change, But yeah, it was definitely an adjustment, and then we had this great news that I was in remission. So we all thought, wow, this is great. And then when I relapsed, we didn't actually tell him for quite some time because we knew how damaging that could be to him and the fear that could create in him. But I have to tell you that honestly, having a young son was such a motivating factor for me to fight and to stay alive because, the thought of him losing his mom, I mean, it was just heartbreaking to me. I had somebody say to me, oh, well, kids lose their moms all the time and they're fine. And I thought, that's not okay. That's my little boy. And my husband said, he said, well, what about me? What about if you die and, I'm going to lose my wife? That's terrible too. And I said, you're going to get another wife, but, a little boy or a little girl, they can't get another mommy or daddy. So I was so motivated to fight. And it was that little face and the thought of his sadness that really gave me such a motivator to just keep going. And, even though I did have a terrible prognosis and relapsing so quickly, I was determined that I was going to be around. I wanted to see him graduate from elementary school, and fifth grade. And this doctor told me like when he was in second grade, I might not be here. And I was like, no, I want to be here. I want to be here to see it. And, now my son who was in kindergarten is now just today finishing his junior year of college. He goes to college in Washington, D.C., and he's finishing. And I was here to see his elementary, middle, high school graduations. I mean, it was a very emotional thing for me to actually witness. But I also thank him because he was a great motivator for me, to stay alive and fight my battle. So.
Well, more power to you on that note, because you've seen his elementary school, middle school, high school, sophomore year at college, and you'll definitely be here long enough to see his kids and their kids.
I hope so. Yeah.
More power to you. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this was about your family, like how does this affect? I understand such a big thing, but I really admire, I really appreciate the way you dealt with it, and without actually giving any damaging memories to your little child. So that, and
Yeah.
also that's definitely the driving factor for anybody in life. I think kids for parents, kids are the most special thing in the world. They're the most special
Right.
individuals. So
Right.
now
And
coming
I said to him at the time, and over the years, and I would say to him, his name is Gus. August is his name, but we call him Gus. And I said to him, Gus, if you want to talk to somebody about your feelings, and I said this to him early on because, there's things that, little children can speak to a therapist or can be with a group of children. And he was always, no, mommy, I'm fine. We have to take care of you. But, I knew over time that this was taking a toll on him as well. And, I knew also as a mom that I only did the best I could do. And, I knew that, we all make mistakes as parents, not intentionally, but, we do our best to raise our children. And I had said to him, over the years, I said, you're going to be in therapy sometime. I know it because no matter what dad and I did to try to raise you, we made errors. We did our best, but we didn't have a guidebook. We didn't get a degree in being a parent. So, we had always joked about, you're going to be in therapy one way or another. And, and there was no shame with that. There's no stigma with that. That's just dealing with life. So, as it turns out, he had a sick mom from the age of 6, until he was 18, for 12 years throughout his elementary, middle, high school. He had a mom who was in treatment because I was in treatment pretty much the whole time, except that one year I was able to watch it, actually a year, over a year, I was able to watch it as it was coming back. And then it was only when it got so badly that I had to go back into treatment. And then I found a clinical trial because the autologous stem cell transplant just didn't make any sense to me. So.
Well, talking about that now. So what light would we expect out of you to put upon the CAR T immunotherapy I would like to know more about that. All our viewers would like to know much more about that, because that's something which happens to have changed your life and and light up a glow on your face.
Exactly. So after my relapse that first time, I found a clinical trial in Los Angeles of an HDAC inhibitor, and it was called Verinostat. It was a phase 2 trial. It was a drug that had been approved for T cell filing for indolent B oral therapy. So I took a pill, and that drug actually kept me stable. So my disease has started to grow very rapidly again right before I restarted my treatment. And so I had to leave work again. And, because I had been working. And so I started this therapy. It was a pill, and I was also getting it in combination with a monoclonal antibody. And so it clipped off the growth, and immediately we could feel the nodes were not growing as rapidly. And then it started to reverse the growth very gradually. And so things started to get a little smaller. And then, unfortunately, about 10 months into the trial, it stopped working, and my cancer started to grow pretty rapidly. So, now I'm in, sort of, 2009, 2000, getting into the end of 2009. And fortunately, by then, there had been a new chemotherapy that had been FDA approved called bendamustine. This was a chemotherapy that was developed in East Germany. And it was the standard of care in the communist blocs. East Germany, they didn't use R-CHOP, they used bendamustine. So it had gone through all the approvals in the US and gotten the approval in 2009, 2010. And so I actually did a whole year of bendamustine Rituxan chemotherapy. I actually, believe it or not, I did 12 cycles, 12 monthly cycles. We were really trying to vanquish my disease. And so, unfortunately, those 12 months, they controlled the disease and they reduced the disease. But after a full year of this chemotherapy, which of course was not without its side effects, like everything, unfortunately, I still had residual disease. And so by that point, there had been another new therapy approved by the FDA, which was called a radioimmunotherapy. And there were two approved by that point. And the one that I got was called Bexar. And that was actually kind of like radiation inside, a targeted radiation where they infuse a radioactive isotope into you that's supposed to destroy the cancer. And so that was my fourth treatment. Again, very optimistic that this was going to work. This was at the end of 2010. And unfortunately, about 3 months later, I was reading the paper on a Sunday morning like this, and I felt nodes in my neck. So I had already didn't work, was already relapsing. And so by that point, spring of 2011, the only thing left for me was an allogeneic stem cell transplant, which is where they harvest someone else's, either their stem cells or their bone marrow. They destroy your own immune system, and then they infuse these donor cells into you. And then you wait to hopefully have it engraft. But of course, as such a heavily treated patient, I was at high risk of mortality as well as morbidity. My siblings were not matches, so I was going to have to get an unrelated donor match. And with that, I had elevated risk of what's called graft versus host disease, where your new immune system, your donor cells, would begin to reject my own organs. So I could get it in my skin, my liver, my kidneys, my eyes. So, it was very risky for me to undergo that. So I again thought, okay, I think it's time to find a trial. So in the spring of 2011, I emailed 8 researchers, actually all over the world. There was a guy in Italy who was developing vaccines for non-Hodgkin. There were some very innovative things happening in Israel. So I connected with a researcher in Israel because I would go anywhere. And then I emailed about 6 researchers in the United States, big centers. And I remember was so depressed because this was my fourth relapse. And I thought, oh my God, I am so heavily treated. What am I going to do? By that point, my son was in the 5th grade. So I made it to the 5th grade for him. And I thought, oh man. So, I was so depressed. I was so devastated. I was dealing with this again. So I had emailed these research and I went to bed. I had to go pick up my son at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I thought, I'm just going to bed. I can't deal. And so this friend had come over and helped me to identify researchers to send emails to. So we emailed, I shut the computer off, I went to bed. About an hour later, my phone rang and my caller ID said UCLA. And I'd never been treated at UCLA yet. And I'd been treated at 3 other cancer facilities in Los Angeles. And it was a researcher from UCLA who said, Miss Adami, you have to come in. I have a phase 1 trial of a PI3 kinase inhibitor. It's a small molecule drug. And I said, why do you, this will be I've already had 4 treatments. Nothing's worked. He said, no, this is working really well for patients just like you, heavily treated, even patients who've had transplants, who've relapsed. You've got to come in. I have only 1 spot left in the trial. There's going to be 20 people in this phase 1 study, and I've already filled all the spots except for 1. You have to come in today or tomorrow so I can do your bone marrow biopsies in my office and we can get you the last spot. So I started that trial in 2011, and it was not without side effects. Some of these small molecule drugs, PI3 kinase inhibitors, can cause, I developed Crohn's, I developed some autoimmune problems. And, but that drug, which was an oral drug, I took pills twice a day. That drug started to melt my cancer away. And by the time I got into this trial, I again had very visible and palpable disease. And I started on these pills and I could feel things starting to go away. So that drug saved my life. That drug is called Zidelig. It was a little company, Calistoga Pharmaceuticals, that came out with that drug. Gilead bought that drug. And I was the longest patient on my trial. I was on that drug for 5.5 years. So from 2011 till the end of 2016, I was on this PI3 kinase trial. And it was a phase 1 trial. As long as I was on the drug, I got it for free. The FDA approved it. They actually fast-tracked it because the results were so excellent. But there were difficult side effects. But I said to my oncologist when we would talk about, gee, maybe we should put you on something else. There really wasn't a lot of stuff then. I said, no, I want to stay on this drug. So they actually reduced my dosing schedule for a while, which minimized my side effects, and it still kept the disease in control. My disease never went away that 5.5 years, but I had stable disease. And in 2012, I had attended a Leukemia and Lymphoma Society event where they talked about CAR T, chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy. 2012, I first heard about it. And I called my oncologist the next day. And I said, what do you know about this? He said, oh, we're developing this at UCLA through Ari Beldegren's research. And he's developed a company called Kite. We're doing this, but we're not ready yet for follicular non-Hodgkin's. It's being used for acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and it's being used for aggressive diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, but not for indolent. So we've got to keep you going. And, if you pull up the research papers that were published about the CAL 101 trials, the phase 1 trial, I am the tail. There's this very long tail that shows as the patients, it's a bar chart that shows as patients drop off. I am that last patient at the very end. I was on the drug the longest in my trial. So 5.5 years I was on Zidelig. Unfortunately, at the end of 2016, I began to feel new nodes. And so the drug had finally pooped out and my cancer figured out how to defeat the drug. So in 2017, CAR T still wasn't available in a trial. So there was a new monoclonal antibody that had been approved called Gazyva. So I did a 10-month course of Gazyva, still not complete remission, stable disease. And unfortunately, when I stopped Gazyva, my disease started to grow rampantly, huge everywhere. And we were just biding time and hoping this kite trial would open. And in the spring of 2018, I got the news CAR T was opening with the kite Zuma 5 trial. There would be 5 slots at UCLA. My oncologist called me right away. I would be patient number 1 in the kite CAR T Zuma 5 study, which was for follicular and marginal zone lymphoma, non-Hodgkin lymphoma patients. So that's when I finally got the ability to start CAR T.
So while going all through these relapses, trials, chemos, drugs, I could sense 2 things here. One is an everlasting desire for life, of living life to the peak one can and one must. And secondly, the very fact that for getting anything in life, if we truly aspire for that, the universe conspires. And that's how you found your way to that one last spot in the clinical trial at UCLA. And then UCLA seems to have changed your life, and rest is history.
Right, right. And, just the fact that that oncologist had called me back in 2011, and, I regret, my path is what it was. And, I wonder if my path would have been different, if I'd found that oncologist earlier in the process. But, you can't second guess. You get to where you are. I'm still alive. I'm so grateful for all the treatment I got over the years, and all the development of new drugs that happened in a time that I could just stay alive and I could buy time until CAR T came along. And what struck me about CAR T was that it was finally personalized medicine. So where all my drugs had been off the shelf, manufactured product, either infusion bags of drugs or oral drugs, pills, 2 of my 7 therapies were oral medications. The other 5 were infusions. But the difference with CAR T was that it was personalized medicine. And so what they do is they harvest the patient's T cells. And so they do what's called an apheresis process, where they remove about 1 million of the patient's T cells, give or take. And so they connect you to a dual line catheter that removes your cells and then returns the excess product, but they take out the T cells. And it takes about 3.5 hours to do the harvesting, really easy, outpatient. And then they send a courier to pick up your T cells, and they courier them to the manufacturing facility, the CAR T manufacturing facility, which for me was right in Los Angeles because Kite was headquartered in Los Angeles. And they grow them in the lab for about 3 to 4 weeks. The process is speeding up now, and they open up your cells and they insert a target onto your cells, and they grow the cells in the lab from about 1 million to about 1 billion cells. And then on your birthday, you go in the hospital on day 0 and they infuse this bag of magical, genetically modified, killer targeted T cells, which have been engineered in the lab to recognize a target that exists on your cancer. So now you go from off the shelf to having this bag of cells that knows your cancer. So it goes into your body and it goes directly and targets the cancer. And when I went into the hospital, my oncologist estimated I had over 8 pounds of cancer burden. And I had a large tumors everywhere in my head and neck. I mean, you wouldn't even recognize me if you saw me. I was just swollen with tumors. I had it in my groin. I had a tumor that was pressing on my kidney. I had a problem with my right kidney, developing a blockage because of tumor burden. It was in my bone marrow. It was everywhere. And so the PET scan was like the most dirty PET scan you could ever see. And that was my pre-CAR T PET scan. Well, just 1 month after getting my CAR T cells, they took me down to the PET CT machine and scanned me, and the disease had completely disappeared. It was gone. There was no evidence, nothing anywhere, nothing lit up. They described it as the most boring PET scan they'd ever seen. And, you know, in 2018, that was August 2018, that's the first clean PET scan I had had since April of 2006. Well, after our chop, we thought it was clean. So since the fall of 2006, almost 12 years later, it took me to get a clean PET scan. So it was this miracle called, to me, it was my miracle, not a miracle to other people, but to me, it was my miracle, CAR T. And now I am almost 3 years clean. July, I go in for a 3-year scan, and I'm expecting a boring scan again because, you know, I still have a neck. You can see I could still have a neck. If you saw me before, I was so puffy. So it's really incredible. Now, what happened to me with CAR T, so remembering I had it kind of earlier on, you know, 3 years ago. I mean, I wasn't like at the bleeding edge of CAR T, but I was pretty early. And so, for example, they didn't want to give me steroids after they gave me my CAR T cells because they were worried it would kill the CAR T cells and it wouldn't work. And they didn't give me anti-seizure medications prophylactically. They didn't, you know, tocilizumab was something that was new. So they didn't really know as much 3 years ago about how to manage this thing called cytokine release syndrome, which we now, a year later of COVID, have learned a lot about cytokine release, because when someone gets a severe COVID infection, they can develop cytokine release. And cytokine release causes, it's your own immune system developing a massive immune reaction, which causes very high fevers, high heart rate, low blood pressure, the life-threatening stuff, right? So this is what happened to me. And the other thing with CAR T is it appeared there was a correlation even 3 years ago. If you had a large disease burden, chances are you were going to have a difficult side effect profile. So I went into this knowing I was a high risk patient for developing a lot of side effects, but I had no other options left. Yeah, I had the allo transplant. I was not going to survive an allo transplant. You know, I had no doubt, given how heavily treated I was. You know, to get me into a remission, I was going to have to undergo another very difficult chemotherapy, you know, and the likelihood, and I didn't have sibling matches. So to me, CAR T looked like a better risk. And so CAR T was my only shot. And, you know, I went in the hospital we didn't know what was going to happen. And so, of course, I developed cytokine release syndrome. They called it grade 4 cytokine. I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, grade 5 means you died. So I knew grade 4 was severe. My fever went above 104. My heart rate was, you know, approaching the high hundreds, not quite 200. But, you know, I developed severe tachycardia and my blood pressure dropped to 60/40. And this was on about day 3 after getting my CAR T cells back. But, you know, they managed my side effects and they put me in the ICU. They pumped me full of fluids. They got me through it. And then just a couple days later, I started to get very confused. So they moved me back to the CAR T floor out of the ICU. And I remember I was writing a blog at the time on Caring Bridge, and my oncologist had come into me, and I was doing a blog every day to update all my friends and family about what was going on. And I remember saying to him, I can't remember how to type. Like I can think, but I can't really figure out how to use the keyboard. And that was like the clue. Something was starting to happen with neurotoxicity. So unfortunately, I developed brain seizures and I had to be put in a coma, a medically induced coma for several days to calm my brain down. But then they weaned me off those. The hospital was incredible. They did such a great job. I still go visit. I mean, I haven't been able to go visit since COVID, but I still like to go visit those people in the ICU because they saved my life. And so they managed those side effects. And like I say now, 3 years later, they give patients steroids tocilizumab. They give patients anti-seizure medications prophylactically. They know so much more now. So patients don't typically experience what I went through, but I survived it. And I came out, and 30 days later, I found out my cancer was gone. And I was just aghast. I thought it was fake. I thought someone had typed up this report. I didn't believe it. It took me like days to actually believe it was true. And then, I got scanned again at my 90-day scan, and then my 6-month, 9-month, 12-month, continue to have clean scans. So I'm just such a beneficiary of medical science, research, all these amazing therapies, and this CAR T that saved my life. Because I was dead. I was going to die from the cancer within a month. I wouldn't, it was so bad. I was so sick when I went in. So I'm just very grateful.
So it is the CAR T which worked wonders for you, and finally, that's the reason why I have this pleasure of talking to you today. And
Yeah.
you mentioned UCLA. Basically, you mentioned something called the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So would you like to add something about it, about being,
I would.
about the journey from being a survivor to a veteran to now an advocate for patients? What
Right.
the journey was like? I mean, I would like to know that.
Okay, so actually, honestly, my involvement with LLS initially was a little bit selfish, um, because I thought, and early on, I started to do fundraisers for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which is, the second largest cancer organization in the U.S. after the American Cancer Society, and they have donated, $1 billion plus to cancer research since their founding. And so selfishly, I thought, well, if I can raise money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, they can fund more research to hopefully find more drugs that can keep me alive. And, a lot of the blood cancer treatments are the same, whether you have a certain kind of non-Hodgkin's or in some cases, some chronic leukemias, they use the same drugs. So I knew that these drugs that were being developed and being funded in part by LLS could potentially benefit me. So I started off a little bit selfish from that standpoint. But over the years, I just saw the work they were doing. And, LLS was one of the first to support the research of CAR T. And they funded close to $70 million in CAR T research at UCLA, actually, and at Penn. And, those projects, didn't fund all of it, but they were an important start in the process to fund CAR T research 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I owe my life to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And so I am a first connection volunteer for them for CAR T. So if a patient's considering getting CAR T, they can talk to me. Or if a patient is relapsing or newly diagnosed, I'm available to try to help. Because oftentimes it's really helpful to have someone who's been through it before to, because it's all the same. If you get cancer, you're doing chemo, you're doing radiation, you're dealing with side effects, it's all the same stuff. So, I've really been a firm proponent of trying to help other people. And also LLS has donated a lot of their money they raise is donated to research. And so, if I can raise money for LLS and fund more research. So in fact, I'm doing a massive fundraiser right now. I'm trying to raise $250,000 to fund more immunotherapy research for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And I've raised about $100,000 to date. And I'm doing this in combination with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society Climb to Cure initiative. And so I'm training to trek to the Mount Everest Base Camp in Nepal, right, your neighbor, right near you. And I was supposed to do this trek April of 2020, and then the world shut down. So I've postponed my trek, but I'm still doing my fundraising. And I have because I'm raising so much money, I have the honor to be able to donate all $250,000 to immunotherapy research. And so I'm very committed to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society mission, because every single one of those therapies I had over my 12 years were at least in part funded through them. And so I'm a big believer in their mission. And, they always like to say, we've got to fund our way out of existence, because the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society would love nothing more than to have cures for all of these diseases. And we're not there yet, which is why I'm still raising money. Not CAR T does not work for every patient. CAR T does not yet work for solid tumors. There's still work that has to happen, and there's trials happening everywhere for every kind of cancer you can imagine for CAR T, but they're not there yet. And so my raising more money to help the mission is one of the most important things that I can do, and to try to help other people. Some people say to me, well, why aren't you just moving on? And I said, because my life is precious, and I shouldn't even be here after all I went through, So I need to try to pay it forward, and I need to try to help other patients. And, that's what my story is all about. Not only to see my son graduate from college, establish a career, and, maybe someday get married or have children. I want to see all of that, but it's to help other people who are not as, who are getting these diagnoses now, and who are dealing with this, and there's not answers yet for all of them. And so I want to do my part to try to raise more money to help other patients.
Well, that's remarkable. I mean, what do I say? You had your journey, and now you are trying to help into others, and that's a way of giving back to the world, giving back to the universe, for it is where we all belong. And
Yeah, and I had one person early on in my cancer diagnosis, a guy who had worked for me many, many years ago, who I heard had gotten cancer, and I knew that. And when I was diagnosed, I reached out to him, and he was the one person that really gave me hope. And he'd been through it. He helped me find doctors to talk to. He helped me understand my illness. And I said to him at the time, I said, Dave, if I get through this, I want to be like you. I want to try to help other people have hope, because it's devastating. A diagnosis like this is devastating, not only physically, but emotionally, and just dealing with it and knowing, it comes out of left field most times for every patient. You never thought you'd ever be dealing with a life-threatening illness, and suddenly you are. And how do you navigate that? And so I also want to write a book, and I've started working on, sort of the framework for a book, because if I can help another person, I've accomplished what I want to do. So,
of course, when you can add value to someone's life, there's nothing like it. And again, I would like to wish you all the best with your fundraising activity, and to all those endeavors that you wish to surpass, all those endeavors you wish to achieve by of helping others, because that's the best thing one can do after getting it from life. I mean, that's quite a journey. I mean, it was really
mhm.
inspiring for me. Towards the informative uh, end of the session, I would like to ask the penultimate question, that what do you miss about the early life, the work life? Do you miss going back to work, working as the finance person, or working into a development firm? What do you miss about that
Yeah.
time?
It's really interesting. I worked for this little company, and I was like the eighth employee. And then we grew the business. We sold the business a couple times, merged with other businesses. But it was like my family. And I joined the firm when I was 24, because what we were doing was so specialized. We tend to hire young people right out of college. So we could really, educate them on the business. And so it was like all of us grew up together, and I missed that camaraderie. But then became part of very large financial institutions that were much more bureaucratic, and we lacked the control to always invest the money in the business the way we wanted to. And it was a pretty cutthroat business. The firm that we were owned by was a wonderful firm, but the finance business was cutthroat, was very competitive, very stressful. And I was basically in business helping other firms make money. And, as a result, I did fine. I made a good living. And of course, one always can miss that, but I don't miss the stress. And I think my priorities were really screwed up. I remember when my son was 8 weeks old, I went to Europe on a business trip. And I think now, looking back on that, I wouldn't have done that. I would have recognized that. And it's kind of sad, but it took cancer for me to realize what's important in life and to slow down and say, okay, I have today. I don't have to worry about a board meeting next month. I'm here today, and so while I miss a lot of that, I miss the entrepreneurial components of what I did and the fun of building products and having successful products. The stress, the cutthroatness, the negativeness in the business, I don't miss any of that. And I just am so happy that I'm here to, enjoy the simple things in life now, which I never really did before. I was always too focused on the next thing that was happening that I had to get ready for, the next thing to worry about. That, my vision was sort of clouded. So all of that is now very clear to me. So my life is 180 degrees, completely flipped around, U-turned from where I was before and the road I was on, and I'm now on a very slow road. I'm a tortoise. I say, when I go to Everest, I'll be the tortoise. I'll have the Sherpa at the back with me. And, the lead Sherpa will be with all my jackrabbits on my team name is Team CAR-T, my fundraiser team. So I'm still looking for people to join the trek to Everest. So if you have any associates who would like to join me, please reach out. And, but yeah, I enjoy where I am today. And, I'm just grateful that I'm here. And I'm grateful for the researchers, for the pharmacology companies that develop these drugs, for the other patients who helped me out. It's all just gratitude for me. So it's good.
Exactly. Our obsession with future is the only thing which tries to ruin our present. And that was well described, your journey by cancer. And even COVID today is teaching all of us that our obsession with future should not be more than our how lively our present could be,
Right.
how entailing it could be. So
Right.
that's a pretty, and of course, if I have any associates and if I could join such a wonderful mission, then of course,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
hands
You wouldn't
are
have to. You
all
wouldn't have
hands
to.
are legs to
You would.
that.
You wouldn't have to travel nearly as far. Just fly into Kathmandu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now with
Yeah.
this, coming to my last question, or may I say, what would be the one last message you would like to leave us with? Not just, I mean, us as YCA, as well as all the viewers, what would be the one last message you would like to give? And if you would like to say something about YCA.
Well, I would like to say never give up. And, I could have given up so many points over the years, but, never give up. Keep seeking, because my experience, I found when I was seeking things out, I found things. So never give up. And I always also said, keep moving. And, even when I had chemo, I would put my tennis shoes on, I would go home, I would take a walk. Even if it was a block, keep moving. Because if you're moving, you're not dead. That was always my mantra. As long as I'm moving, I'm okay. So don't give up and keep moving. As far as the mission, I think it's a fabulous mission of, YCA, what you all are trying to do. I'm still learning about it. But, I think creating awareness, raising funds, I mean, that's the thing that really holds back quicker development, right? If you can't get researchers, you can't get associates to help you. And the projects that were funded that saved my life, we're not done yet. There's still more to be done, not only for other blood cancers, for blood cancers CAR-T doesn't work for and other immunotherapies don't work for solid tumor cancers like pancreatic, ovarian, glioblastoma. I mean, all these cancers, solid tumor cancers that really need work and need funding. And also autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease, you know, a lot of these therapies are likely going to work for those types of incidents. So, you know, I would say I think the mission's fabulous. I wish you all the best. May you raise a lot of money and generate, you know, a lot of funding for cancer research.
Thank you very much for that lovely message and this scintillating experience of a journey. For me, this will be an experience for life of having heard this journey, having learned so much about it. And what I conclude from it, could just say that in every moment, choice exists. We can either cling to the past or embrace the inevitability and let a wonderful future unfold before us. So with
Right.
this, I would like to conclude the session. It was great interacting with you, ma'am. And so
Thank you. Thank you.
it was a
I
great.
was going to say that. Sorry, the
Yeah, yeah.
lag. I was going to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been my pleasure to share my story today. And yeah, just feel free to get back in touch with questions and whatnot. And if you have anybody that needs help, I'm here to help. So really nice to meet you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it indeed was my pleasure, the pleasure of YCA of having you here with us and being in conversation with us. With this was Vikrant Gaikwad, Executive Assistant Chief Information Officer at YCA, with Mrs. Laurie Adami from LA, US, signing off. And hereby I adjourn the session. Thank you so much.